Welcome to a very special The Lost Signals podcast at the Podcast Movement 2017 in Anaheim, California.
Hey, welcome to a special episode of On the Horn with Steevo. I'm here with a guest that we all met over here at Podcast Movement, as you can see behind us. We're here to talk about kind of getting into podcasting and kind of, you know, how somebody who's new to it does their research, kind of starts a new show, and that type of thing. So I'm here with Julian Boireau. All right, so let's get into it, man. Let's start off with this. What made you decide to get into podcasting now?
I worked in print media for about a year and a half, and that's always been the direction that I've taken, just as a matter of being good at it. Mm-hmm. It was an elective course that I took sophomore year of high school. That worked out well. I stuck with it throughout college, and then it was the easiest way to get a job post-grad. And after kind of a year and a half of working in Chicago, I'm originally from Los Angeles, trying to make my college relationship work at the same time. You know, when that fell through, I noticed that I wasn't really in love with my job. The hours were horrible. And I thought about my passions and what I could do to satisfy both my creative desires as well as kind of the overarching desire to do something that you love for money.
Yeah.
So I moved back home and kind of settled myself, saw that this convention was happening, and saw it as the first opportunity to explore more about the industry.
So was that when you saw, you know, Podcast Movement is going to be pretty close to your hometown? You're from LA, or you're in LA now.
Yeah.
When you saw that it was going to be pretty close, was that kind of your impetus to get more into it, or were you already thinking about it before that?
It's always something that I've thought about because I listen to so many podcasts. Mm-hmm. And as a matter of it being a pretty new industry, I feel like it's one of the few things where if you consume a lot of it, you might have a better idea of how to produce it than, say, television or movies, where it's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking of people who say, oh, I could have written a better script than that, without knowing however many times the studio gives feedback to writers. Yeah. Or advertisers say, we don't want to be linked up with that kind of language or idea. So it has been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I recorded podcasts for fun with my friends in college. Now that I've moved back home, I'm recording podcasts with one of my best friends as a means of developing chemistry with a co-host, mm-hmm. learning more about the editing process, even if it's just through GarageBand. So it has been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. This was my first opportunity to meet people who are actually successful in the industry and who are trying to do it for a living.
Yeah, I think one of the best parts of Podcast Movement so far, we've been here, you know, this is our day 2, and your day 3, I think, right? You were here on Tuesday?
Yeah.
I think that one of the best parts has been the meeting people. The panels are great. I've enjoyed a few of them. Missed out on a couple for a whole other reason that, well, I'm sure we'll tell you about. But I think that some of the best parts of this have been talking to people like you. A couple other people are going to do an interview with somebody else in a little bit. And I think that just having these conversations has helped us out a lot. And so thank you. And you know, like it's really interesting to talk to somebody like yourself who's just kind of on the cusp of starting out. And what I want to ask you about next is your show. what show you want to start with, and because you told us a little bit about this, and
well,
I think
it's
it's a
an
great
idea for
idea.
a show, and I appreciate you saying someone who's just starting out, because in my mind, I'm restarting.
Yeah,
because
true.
I had a
you said you were
like I had a life where like I had someone that I wanted to spend a lot of time with. I had a job that was paying me enough to live on my own and be independent.
Yeah.
And you know, I bought a car, I had an apartment and a neighborhood that I loved, and I kind of threw that all away because let's try something new. I was recognized my unhappiness, and that in itself is like throwing away a life that you don't think is going to be satisfying but provides you stability towards a life that you think could be very promising but could very well fall through.
Right.
So I appreciate you saying that I'm just starting out, because in my eyes, like, I'm restarting, which
every time
may
you
have a
restart,
more negative connotation when I explain it to other people. But yeah, I do have an idea for a show right now.
Yeah.
I've appreciated talking to you guys because it's given me more of an idea that it is something that may be feasible. It's called Sad Clown. I record it with one of my best friends from high school. We went to the same high school. We were not friends at the time. We reacquainted ourselves through a mutual friend after graduation and just hit it off from there. It's kind of based off of the duality of we love comedy and laughing. We also are in pretty dark places. He's trying to be a director living in LA. He's unemployed and self-sponsoring music videos and directorial debuts out of his own pocket. I'm restarting my life now living in my grandparents' house, where like I used to live on my own and be able to do whatever I wanted. And it's kind of based off the idea that we start the first half around 15 minutes griping about things in a comical fashion, speaking ironically about things that are popular in the world. Definitely like when half of the booths here have logos on fidget spinners, like that's an idea that we'd want to dive a little bit further into.
Yeah.
Then around the middle, we like to play some music, like to review whatever we're drinking during the episode, and then at the end, talk about real insecurities that we have as mid-20-year-olds starting off in different industries. You know, as you said, you know, coming to terms with our existential place in the universe, which is something that a lot of people agree comes to you around this age. And just being honest about kind of the cycles in our life that contribute to depression or anxiety, and whether or not we think that these are things that can be easily interrupted or not.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really important thing to talk about, especially like we were talking about this earlier, and I said I think that can be a really cathartic thing, and you were like, yeah, it is. But you've done a couple episodes of this at this point, right? Like not released, but you've recorded.
Yeah. We've met every Wednesday for about 5 weeks now.
Okay.
The show wasn't what it is now when we first started. It was, the first one was like 85 minutes of us just shooting the shit. We've now gotten it down to like 40 of having 2 distinct segments.
Yeah.
You know, I think that it is kind of fun to give people an out midway through and say, we're done being funny, we're gonna get real.
Yeah.
If you don't want to engage with that, please leave now. And, you know, now coming to terms with the fact that we're proud of our work, but we're scared about being more honest on a podcast than we are with the people in our lives. And how do you come to terms with that? You know, is that something that I need to fix in my daily life about being more honest? Or is it a hurdle that I have to jump in realizing that everybody holds back and people might appreciate listening to me being completely open while not necessarily confronting me about that
right
throughout our regular interactions?
Yeah, it's a really weird space that you guys are trying to occupy, and I think that I think it's kind of a noble pursuit to an extent. Like just thinking about this, you told me about this maybe 20 minutes ago, half an hour ago, for the first time, and like it's kind of been running through my head. Like I really like the duality of that type of show, because that's kind of what life is about. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of things to laugh at, and there's a lot of things to be sad about, and there's a lot of drinks to be had. So like you actually got all three portions of that.
I think that it is something that should be brought more out into the open.
Absolutely.
Is that part of growing up is realizing that you can have both of these sets of feelings, and that makes up one whole person. The idea that you have instances of darkness doesn't mean that you're necessarily in a depressive state.
Yeah.
But it's also, important to recognize the brevity of life, and that you have to laugh and indulge. So you've been here for a couple days now. This is the end of your second day.
We got in late yesterday.
What has been your biggest takeaway from this conference in terms of, because we were talking about, obviously networking is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. We're trying to make connections because we want to monetize this, and we want to be a part of an industry, not just be alone in our homes. But there also have been interesting sessions. So what have you been thinking about?
Well, I actually, one of the panels I think that you were at, I think we mentioned this earlier, it was basically just a bunch of interviews with people and them talking about how they consume podcasts. So I really, it wasn't the most entertaining talk that I've seen, but it was probably the most informative.
Yeah.
And it gave me a lot of ideas about how to approach our audience, things like that, which I'm looking forward to kind of working on in the future. I'll be talking to Scott and Ian are back here, manning the camera and producing for us over here. So I'll be talking to them about that for sure. But, I've got a notebook that I have 4 or 5 pages full of notes from that panel, which I'm kind of interested in talking about. So I guess that being said, I was actually going to ask you a similar question, but you beat me to it. What are you taking away? Or I was kind of going to ask what was the most important panel you think that you saw, or you saw the keynotes yesterday that we missed. What was the most important thing that you think you've seen?
So I've taken away a couple things. Number one is that the most popular podcasts, in my opinion, are not the most popular podcasts. Right. I sat in on the very first day, this session that ran from 9 to 5, and it essentially took you through idea to monetization to sustainability of your podcast. And I could not relate to a single one of the speakers. One of the women was all about positivity, and the first thing she did was I want everybody to stand up and say, "You're awesome." I'm awesome, you're awesome. Shake people's hands, give people hugs. I don't think it's a stretch to say, I just told you about my podcast. That's not really the vibe that I feel.
Well, it's, if it's not you, it's not you.
To me, with all due respect to her, that seems kind of fake to me. What I'm trying to identify are the real trials and tribulations that we face, right, and how we can use humor to counteract that. So it's definitely been a gut check, seeing that everybody here is probably on average 20 years my senior. At least. Everybody has apparently a health and wellness podcast or financial management. I know that the demographics here are skewed because the people who go to professional conferences are professionals
and older to an extent.
They're older.
They have the money to do it.
And when I say professionals, in their other lines of work that support their podcasts, they are lawyers or consultants or doctors, what have you. So they're used to kind of coming to a convention center and shaking people's hands, exchanging business cards, something that people our age, I don't think are as inclined to do.
Right.
Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, the idea that 500 dedicated listeners who really interact with each other and interact with you are more important than 1,000 people who tune in sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, when you look, during the session that you were talking about, they showed us screenshots of these people's phones so that we got an idea of what their podcast feed looked like. And you noticed that some podcasts that had the little exclamation point next to them, where it's like, you haven't listened to this in a long time, so we're going to stop auto-downloading. Right. Or like the TED Talks podcasts that had like 93 unlistened to episodes because they're dropping like 5 a day. And then you had the ones that were near the top where it's like, I really, really love this. Mm-hmm. So whereas I always like my idol being like a Bill Simmons type, who's like reaching millions of people, has major sponsors, all of that good stuff. Like, if I can have a small community that are invested in each other, like, one of the things that I hope is that if people have their own difficulties that they're dealing with, they can reach out to a community centered around my podcast that will help them up or help cheer them up.
Right.
So community's been something that, you know, to me, I feel like I know a lot of the hosts that host my favorite podcasts, and even more so, I have more commonality with a listener I've never met than with somebody that I go to work with.
Yeah.
So that's been my main takeaway, is foster that community. Find a group of dedicated people who you can actually help and provide a service to, as opposed to aiming at the big number, but having it be like, would you rather be Halt and Catch Fire on AMC with 300,000 dedicated viewers, or would you rather be Desperate Housewives being in many more homes, but it's background noise to a couple who's half a bottle of wine deep and now fighting. So that's really been my main takeaway. I mean, how can I get 10 people who really like it?
Yeah.
And so many of the metrics-based sessions have been like, word of mouth is by far the best way that people learn about podcasts. So how can I find 10 people who like it? How can one of them talk to one of their friends and integrate them into the group?
Right.
And that's kind of one of the reasons that I'm inclined to listen to very long podcasts, because I'm by myself for a long time. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to skew towards shorter podcasts so that when people look at the feed, if I'm a couple months deep, they are insanely intimidated.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you guys are topic-based, so people will be inclined to, obviously you're going to be shooting for people who are listening to every single one, but like when I go onto your feed after this, and you're like, oh, Hell or High Water, I really liked that movie. What did these guys think about it? This video game, I'm thinking about playing it. What did these guys think about it? It's going to be more inclined towards individual topics or subjects.
That's kind of where we're at. You know, we're not, and that's an interesting thing that we've been thinking about, and kind of what I like about doing interviews, and we have another show that's about narratology, like the study of narrative, is those subjects, like those shows, are things that people can follow from top to bottom. Mm-hmm. In terms of our movie reviews, you're going to go through and see which movies you've seen and go look at those. Yeah. Which is, you know, so I kind of like that we have both sides of the aisle there, and I like that we have a system in our movie reviews where we can say, hey, if you like this movie, check it out. But we also have a system where it's like, hey, go listen to what we think about, or go listen to all these interviews that we've done, or go listen to us talk about narrative theory. Or
the idea is like, I feel like I was raised to an extent on television, mm-hmm. because my parents divorced when I was young. My mom worked to support my sister and I. I was oftentimes at home, like, the cast of Scrubs were like my best friends in middle school.
It was a great
and I'm
show.
not joking.
Yeah, I know.
So if I can be that kind of person for somebody else, that's a serious relationship.
Yeah.
That's a serious service that you can provide to people. And to hear you guys, like, the feedback that you've given me is incredible to say, like, I think that's a worthwhile endeavor. Whereas when I'm sitting down and I'm actually in it, it's me and my buddy in our living room. Mm-hmm. I have talked about how, like, I am now just coming out of, like, a depression that was probably 7 months long, and kind of am starting to understand the difference between being okay, being alone, versus isolation. One of the reasons that I left my job, I was working from 5 to 1. All of my friends had regular 9 to 5s. Yeah. I was never seeing any of them. Mm-hmm. That's forced isolation. Being okay, being alone is saying, I have a plan, or I don't need to be constantly distracted from, like, the physical manifestation of grief or loss that I'm feeling, like, either through, like, alcohol or, like, friendship.
Right.
You know, I don't need anything to numb how I'm feeling because I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that's, like, one of the things that I like to talk about in, like, not as many words, but
right. I mean, that's
like something that I think may be universal at our age.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's kind of I think there's something really powerful to be said for a good comedy, but also to be said for, and this is in terms of your show that you're working on, even if you never release a single episode of that, I think it's good that you're doing it, because there's something you said for laughing.
Yeah, I'm talking about helping other people. This is helping me
about
right now.
That stuff.
Like,
and absolutely,
and that's
to some
serious.
extent, a podcast has to do that. It has to be for you before it can be for everybody else. Otherwise, you're never going to continue.
I mean, that's one of the crazy things that people were talking about, like, during this opening session that I was at for new podcasters. They were talking about, like, oh, know your avatar. Know if you have one person who's listening to your show, what do they look like? How do they take their coffee? Like, X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, shouldn't it kind of be the other way around? Shouldn't it be, like, looking at who you really are and what you really like to do, and then the listeners will decide for themselves whether or not it's for them? Like,
yeah, kind of the better you know yourself, the more people will appreciate
the
what you're
question
talking
that,
about.
like, I should have asked, and this happens all the time when you sit in a conference and you're like, oh, that's the question that I really wanted to have answered, was how many people in this room, like, have an avatar that is them?
Yeah.
You know, how you start to realize, like, yeah, I'm unique because of how I was raised and the knowledge that I've accumulated up to this point in my life. But I fall into a typecast, and, like, there's more than enough people in the world like me who, if I can reach out to them and provide a service to them, you know, that's a serious audience base in itself.
Absolutely, it really is. And there is something, like, there's something really important that comes from an honest podcast or TV show or movie, whatever, any form of art. The closer it cuts to the bone, a lot of times, the more people will see themselves in it, even if they're not in that exact same situation, you know?
Yeah.
You see, like, little things about yourself that, you know, either that could be me, or that was me, or that is me, you know? That type of thing. And I think there's something really important in that, and especially in people talking about that. And, you know, we do a pop culture podcast, so we don't go to that level all that often.
Yeah.
But when we do get into serious conversations about stuff like that, I don't want to say because I don't always necessarily enjoy it. Sometimes it's like a really introspective thing. But, like, when I get to talk about stuff like this, it's really, I keep saying this word, but I think it's an important thing for anybody to go and look at themselves in that way at some point and somewhat related to what you're doing in life.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of an elevator pitch, I'd say like the Sad Clown's like a bilateral examination of catharsis. Both sides. It's like extreme happiness and joy and laughter, and then like grief and tears and openness and honesty. And admittedly, like, we consume alcohol to like move us down that path. But yeah, I mean, I think that like there's just a lot of rage that exists now, and there's like abuse that people put onto themselves because they're trying to have some kind of escape.
Yeah.
So if there can be an auditory version of that isn't like psychotherapy or like audio hypnosis, which some people are doing here, which to me sounds like if you genuinely need to see a psychiatrist, like see a psychiatrist.
Don't see a podcast psychiatrist.
Perhaps. Whereas like it's versus like me, where I'm recognize my limitation as a 24-year-old, my buddy being the same age, and saying, what can we offer? It's this, Yeah,
and that's going to be constantly changing as you.
Not to mention the fact that
life.
like I don't want to do like a serial style thing or a narrative style thing where I have to interview a bunch of people, and like not because I don't think I'd be capable, but because that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. And
I need something smaller than I can tackle right now.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I'm sure you don't seem work averse to me necessarily. Like I'm sure you do a lot of work, but if you really wanted to do it, but like, do you really want to spend your time editing like interviews, or do you want to spend your time talking about what you want to talk about?
Yeah.
And that's kind of, it sounds like that's where you're at right now, and maybe that'll change.
Passion is important.
But like,
that's been another thing that I've recognized here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's.
If there's one thing that you want to do that. And if that doesn't work, then at least you can be happy in that you tried, versus like I became successful doing something that I'm never going to be able to like continue over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, again, I'm trying to change industries right now.
Yeah.
So my other goal here was to talk to people about what kind of editing and producing jobs there are. I'm going to take a Pro Tools certification course in a couple weeks, and I'm going to try to manifest some of the connections that I've made here into opportunities to build a portfolio, and then pitch that portfolio of edited works to larger podcast companies. And like, that's my 6-month plan.
Yeah. In
terms of like acquiring a portfolio, and then over the next couple months, seriously hitting the ground running, talking to places like Earwolf and HeadGum and Gimlet, like whoever hires podcast producers and editors, and just trying to make my living that way, because I recognize that the hosting things, like, it's like trying to be talent in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I know a lot of actors, and I know like a lot of people who have moved out to LA, and then I talked to them and they said, I'm going to go get my MFA in writing and, try to do something academic, because it was too hard to do something in the entertainment industry. And I recognize that that's an uphill battle. Right.
And like the more varied you are in what you do, the better it's going to turn out usually.
Yeah, and if I can edit my own stuff, then maybe it'll be more valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's do this. Is there anything else that you want to talk about or throw out there in terms of like, I don't know, you're still kind of working on it. What we'll do is we'll keep up with you, and once you have your information
next year or the year after that, I want to be at the fucking podcast awards, and I want to be like walking up onto that stage. Like, I met a guy who was literally like, I've been doing this for 18 months and I already got an award. So wow. I figure if this like dude can do it, like I can, like maybe I can too.
Absolutely.
I mean, this stuff is attainable. That's what's cool. is like people were sitting in that room during the awards and they got called up for stuff and they did not even know that they were in consideration.
Yeah.
So it's still that kind of small industry and small group of people where you can really make a name for yourself and show up and, you know, be like kind of a baller, you know?
Yeah, it really is, and there's so much
like room. I don't know if they're like podcast groupies, like I'm sure Mark Maron has them and stuff like that. But like, how could I pick that up? What's up, Mitch? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say is like, look out, because my ambitions are like, I've only felt like, okay, I know that your arm is very tired. I've only felt really, really, really good like a few times in my life. The very first time is, I'm only good at journalism. I got really, really bad grades in school at Knox College. I was near the bottom of my class, but at the Illinois College Press Association, the very first time that I ever went, I got called up for an award that I didn't even know that I was nominated for. And that feeling motivated me to produce the best quality journalism that I could while I was at school. And get more awards next year. And my last year, I got 8 different things, and every single time I walked up, I was like, yeah. So that's the feeling that I'm chasing. Yeah. You know, I live off of those extreme highs, and when I saw people walking onto that stage, that was motivating for me.
I want to be up there.
That's value in itself in attending these conferences.
Absolutely.
Even though you don't get a prize or anything like that, to know that people are watching and that it's important to people, and podcasting is very important to people, more important than any of the fat bastards that are at the Academy Awards. Their lives are fine regardless.
Yeah.
They're coked up. They are fine. You know, everybody at the Podcasting Awards, they're scrapping, and I'm very proud to be trying to do this right now. So anyway,
absolutely,
Steve,
it is.
It was good talking to you, man.
It has been very good. Let me do this, as I always end off with. I always want to give our listeners and viewers just a little taste of where you're at with what we're talking about. So, do you have a top 5 podcast list?
Yeah, my number 1 podcast is Your Kickstarter Sucks. It's with Jesse Farrar and Mike Hale. It fucking rocks. I laughed so hard. They have kind of a normcore comedy vibe where they're always stumbling over their words, very monotone, but pointing out how fucking stupid we are with so many of these Kickstarters. The radical unicorn sticker line gets $300,000, you know, or they're like the Bluetooth water bottle. Why does that exist? I think that's hysterical.
Right.
And that's an indie podcast. Dan Carlin was just here. His Hardcore History podcast and Common Sense podcast, more independent productions, are out of this world. I used his Hardcore History stuff to write papers in college all the time. Bill Simmons is an idol of mine. I like how he sticks it to ESPN. I like that he's kind of a basketball historian in his own right, even if I don't agree with a lot of his points of view. Number 4, I'm going to do this all off the dome without looking at this. The Bodega Boys, awesome. Jesus and Miro, very, very funny. They drop on a Friday, and my friends and I honestly use that podcast. It's the only one that I listen to with other people in the room, and we use it to laugh and turn up on a Friday before we go out. I don't know any other podcast that I can say that about. They also have a great late night show on the Viceland channel. And then number 5, I'm probably going to have to give that to High and Mighty. That's a HeadGum production. That's with Jon Gabrus. He's from Long Island. He's hysterical. He brings on his comedian friends to talk about just things that they're interested in. So conspiracy theories or rugby, swimming, cooking, cannabis, which is how I learned about my favorite cooking show, Bong Appetit, also on Viceland. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add one more, the Doughboys. The Doughboys, Feral Audio production. They do fast food and chain restaurant reviews. And they also have a Patreon subscriber podcast where they will do other food-related stuff like reviewing The Founder, which is the McDonald's movie, or reviewing celebrity-sponsored alcohol lines like Ciroc or the Coppola, the Francis Ford Coppola wine.
Right, yeah.
So, yeah, those are my 6 favorite podcasts. They're almost all sports or comedy.
Awesome. Well,
And I think that like me talking about those is like, when I'm excited, my grandma is always like, that's something that you really care about. And that's how I genuinely feel about podcasts, which is why I'm trying to break into this industry.
Awesome. Well, the industry welcomes you, or at least we do.
Thanks.
And we're looking forward to seeing some of your stuff, man.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us today, Julian.
I'll send you guys some demos because you don't know my friends or family.
That's true. Yeah, we'll take a listen and we'll let you know what we think. And everybody that's been listening, thanks a lot. I've been Steevo here with On the Horn, and we're going to sign out now. Have a good one from Podcast Movement.
Take it easy.
This has been a special edition of On the Horn with Steevo. Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer. Music by Christopher Morgan. For more information on Podcast Movement, please go to podcastmovement.com.